Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. My guest today is Stacy Wyatt, who, amongst other things, is an adaptive yoga instructor who joined me on the show to encourage you to discover the benefits of adaptive yoga. And I'm not just talking about being more active. This was a deep and meaningful conversation, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I encourage you to listen to the end as the highlights just kept coming. Now, just before we get started with the interview, allow me to share for a moment a little bit about my book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened: 10 Tools for Recovery and Personal Transformation. Within its pages lie the profound stories of 10 stroke survivors, each illustrating the transformative journey from adversity to personal growth, spanning topics from nutrition and exercise to managing the emotional aftermath. This book serves as a guiding light for all those navigating the path to recovery. To discover more about this invaluable research, visit recoveryafterstroke.com/book. Stacy Wyatt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here and requesting to be on the show. I love it when people reach out and request to be on the show. It makes my life a little bit easier. It means I don't have to find people. And
Nice.
I love meeting people who want to help people. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, my background is sort of an interesting story. I am a mom to three amazing human beings, and my middle child, my only daughter, was born with multiple disabilities. And the first 10 years of her life was really tough. I wasn't very happy that this was what was given to me, and I really resisted it for a long time. And so I found a yoga practice thinking that would make me a better person and or make me stretchier. My intention was initially that I would be more flexible, and I had no idea it would change my life in such amazing ways. And I initially stepped into teaching yoga to people with developmental disabilities and thinking that would be a bridge for my daughter and I, and it just wasn't for her. Like, she wanted nothing to do with it, but I felt so drawn to bringing yoga to people who couldn't access a traditional setting. Like, they couldn't go to a yoga studio because there were barriers, and maybe that was a disability or a mental illness or income or size or age. And so I knew I didn't want to just teach normal, everyday, super flexible, cute yoga people. I wanted to reach a different population. So I really began almost 17 years ago with that intention. And as time went on, I found a great love and appreciation for people with traumatic brain injuries, because I feel like they're living an everyday life, all is well, they've got a career, a family, and in an instant, their life is completely changed. And I just felt like that was my heart and soul. So I did some more studies and became more schooled in brain injuries and what that looks like. And here I am. And so my students now range from acquired brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, dementia, Parkinson's, any sort of really neurological condition. And I serve hundreds of individuals every single month. It's crazy.
That is probably lovely. Um, I know crazy you're using it in that way, but it's probably crazy good, right? It sounds like it is.
Crazy good.
Tell me about your daughter a little bit. Like, what condition were you guys dealing with when she was born? What was it that she um, had?
Well, initially I just thought, is this how girls are? Like, I had a son and I thought, like, this is hard. Like, she was hard. And as an infant, now that I know what I know, like, I just never connected with her. She always was staring off into space, and she never engaged in a way that like a baby does when you approach them in the little basket and they get all like wiggly and happy to see you. There was none of that. And by the time she was 2, there was some big differences that were happening, and language wasn't coming, and she was very particular about things. And so, of course, we got a diagnosis of autism spectrum, but that wasn't really it. And it took until she was 17 years old to identify that she actually has a very rare genetic change. Her chromosome in one of her little rungs of her ladder is missing. And the features of the syndrome very much look like somebody who has autism and other just developmental delays. So it's hard to explain, like, yeah, she has tendencies like somebody with autism, but it's so much bigger than that because there's some physical stuff that we didn't know about and cognitive stuff that she'll be 30 in just a couple weeks, and she's really more like a 10-year-old, a pretty happy 10-year-old now that she has some strategies and we've come to understand each other well and things are good. But it was hard. It was really hard.
I can imagine. So what's it like though, as a mum? You don't have any expectations that your kids are going to be quote unquote different. We'll call, I don't know, there's no other word for me to come up with.
Sure.
Just say different. You have one child who's born as expected, and then the second one is a little bit of a challenge because you're not recognizing things that, because you have no experience in that type of
Yeah.
condition, you don't recognize things. So you stumble and you fumble, and it's
Mm,
frustrating and it's challenging. At the 10-year mark, you kind of go, oh, I need to do something for myself. Was it out of, had you come to the realization that you need some self care? Because caregivers tend to neglect themselves, especially if
mhm.
you've got three kids. Mums neglect themselves all the time, but then when you're dealing with a child who's a little more um, requires a little different strategy, you're even more stretched. It's even harder.
Yeah.
What did you
Yeah.
do to support
It,
yourself for those 10 years? And then what was it like to get to this realization that you needed to do something more than just go about your normal day?
yeah. It was crazy. I was a very young mom and young married mom trying to play that role of being a wife and a young mom. And I didn't understand myself. I chose to get married and then chose to have three little kids very early into my 20s. And when there's such a stressor of being young and financially struggling, as young people often are, and then you have this child that you don't understand. And when she was early elementary ages, I would take her to school, and there would be other moms with little girls that would take their child and kind of shy away from Lindsay. And I just thought, this is so wrong. Like, I felt so different. I didn't have connections with other moms. I didn't know any other parents of people with disabilities. And my marriage fell apart. My husband at the time just couldn't do it. He had that choice, I guess, to leave. So here I was, a single mom with three kids, no education, and I was angry. I was toxic. I was physically ginormously heavy, energetically, spiritually heavy. I was a mess. And I found yoga and I thought, I love this so much. I'm going to become a yoga teacher. And in my first yoga teacher training, the teacher was talking about suffering, and being that I was young and full of what I thought I knew everything and a little bit of ego, I went to him during the break and I said, you don't know anything about suffering. My daughter, she suffers. Nobody likes her. She looks different. She doesn't get invited to parties. She's suffering. And he just smiled really tenderly and kind of leaned in and he said, who's suffering? And I just was getting furious. Like, you're not hearing me. Like, nobody likes her. She has no friends. People stare at her. People stare at me. They think I'm a bad parent. And I just kept going on. And he finally got so close to me, he probably could have kissed me. And he said, who's suffering? And it was like a thunderbolt hit me. And I realized this was all about me. And I went home from that training, 14 hours, I went home and I looked at her through an entirely different lens. I looked at her through the lens that she's not suffering, that she's herself, she's fine. She lives in happiness and joy. And I saw her as perfect. And when I did that and I was able to see her and accept her and say yes, literally within a year, my life changed. I found my purpose. I knew I wanted to do what I wanted to be doing today. And I went out into the world with a lot of information and a lot of heart to say, these people need to be seen and they need to be heard just as they are. And really, I call that time in my life around when I was 30 as my great wake up, because I literally shut something on, turned something off, turned something on in me, that the anger went away. Love came into my being. I lost 80 pounds. I got lighter in my spirit. I found myself. And I often say that she was like this gift holding this door open for me. And her spirit was saying, if you say yes, your life's gonna be unreal. And literally within 9 months to a year of me saying yes to who she is, my life has just tremendously changed. And so while it was really hard and I had very minimal support, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Sounds like the exact title of my book.
Nice,
I wrote a book.
nice.
I wrote a book that's called The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing
Mm,
That Happened to Me.
yeah, it
Okay. And there's
really
this
is.
chapter about exercise in there. And
Mm,
what I'm trying to do is encourage people to understand the benefits of exercise, but also demystify it so that they don't think that what exercise is running laps or
yeah,
doing CrossFit or, pumping massive weights or whatever. That's not exercise that um, is necessarily useful for somebody who's had a
yeah,
stroke or has a neurological condition or something like that, that can just simply sit on a chair and be guided by a yoga teacher and that says,
mm,
move this way, move that way to your best of your ability, do this and do that. And
yeah,
your your it's like your path to finding your purpose sounds like it came from going with the flow rather than fighting the current.
yeah, yeah,
And then once you
for sure.
discover that your daughter is this way and she's probably okay with it, well, then that's when the learning has to come. It's you who has to grow up and
Yeah.
start acting like an adult and then
Yeah.
discovering the things about yourself that you need to improve on. And those
Mhm.
things, for me, it was a classic example. Like for me, I was 37 and I had to start my personal development, although I had played
Mhm.
in the space a little bit. I had to start my personal development at 37 once I had a stroke because I was suffering, and suffering without purpose is
Mhm.
terrible.
Mhm.
But when you've got a purpose and your suffering kind of has given is given an outlet, the suffering tends to ease and the purpose comes alive, and you find yourself in this space like me after 300 episodes of the podcast so far. You find your space in this space with something that you love doing, and it's easy to do. There might be a lot of work and there might be a lot of challenges around it, but it's easy to do
Mhm.
emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. And then and then you've transformed this supposedly terrible situation, the one that you thought was
Mhm.
terrible, into an amazing opportunity for personal development and growth. And then you're an
Mhm.
example to your family, to your friends, to your children about how somebody might tackle a difficult situation. And then people
Yeah,
look at you in awe and they go, Stacy, oh my God, how do you manage to do everything? You're this super mom, you're this superwoman, you do yoga and you do this. And it's like, you probably have a busy day, but you don't find it difficult to do these things. You find it rewarding and
for
purposeful and
sure.
useful. And yeah, tell me, how
Yeah.
does that describe
So
you?
much. Yeah. And I often say, like, when I go to work, I get in my car and sometimes I have to commute 200, 300 miles just to knock on the door of a home where people who have traumatic brain injuries are living. And I walk in, knock on the door and say, hey, I'm here for yoga. And I think this isn't even work. This is such joy. And it's so amazing that I get to do this. And it's I'm grateful that I get to do it. I don't have to do it. I get to do it. And I think there's a big difference in that. A lot of people feel like going to work is something they have to do. And I'm just blessed. I am grateful that I make a living doing it. The money is so irrelevant to me. I love it so much. I would do it for free, but um, maybe someday I'll go back to that. I volunteered for 4 years before I actually started contracting with agencies, and I do eventually want to go back to that model of just serving without financial gain. But right now it's paying the
Mm,
mortgage and it's good. And um, I think my experience with somebody who has an everyday normal life, whatever normal is,
mhm,
and an event happens. For me, what I've come to realize with that population of brain injuries, particularly because it's such an instant, right? Whether it's a stroke and you're having a great day and then boom, is there's such a tendency in rehab to make sure the person can toilet, eat, walk, transfer, maybe get dressed. And my thinking when I see these individuals, who's talking about grief and loss, and their career is over, their family life is over, their ability to drive and be independent and cook a meal, and there's so much loss. And so part of the yoga that I offer these individuals is to find wholeness in what's new to them now, not what was, because this is an entirely different experience. And so a lot of my yoga work, I'm a big stickler in our Western view of yoga here in the United States is just so physical based, and there's a place for it for sure. But there's 7 other big parts of the yoga practice that has to do with how we show up in the world. And a lot of that is an understanding of who we are. And and so that's my gift to my students, is really helping them see that even if their body doesn't move the way that it did, or their memory or their language, or maybe they can't speak at all, but they use a device, that they're still whole and there's still a deep purpose in them that we have to uncover and figure out what that is. And if it's becoming some sort of advocate for fellow people that live in their house and helping somebody else do everyday activities of daily living because they can, like that might be your purpose. And letting them see that there still has a place in this world for them to shine. And it's a lot of work and there's a lot of big emotions, and I get challenged sometimes by more exercise based people who observe my work because their thinking is, well, can't they be doing more physically? And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe, but right now we gotta purge some of this pain, or they're never going to be able to get there. And so that's really what I'm passionate about the most, is just really seeing individuals as they are today. And in fact, I rarely even want to know how their injury came to be. If they want to share that, that's fine, but I don't inquire about it because I want to just see who they are in that moment on a random Tuesday. I don't need to know all that. Maybe it comes out in time and it's relevant and I need to know some things, but I really try not to get too curious about their life before their event, unless it's really applicable to their health and something I need to know, like a spinal injury or something. But I really try to see them, and that's what they need. They need to not be seen as the broken, disabled, half paralyzed person. They need to be seen as whole. And I want to give that to them.
yeah, that's an awesome gift. You know, what you said about the people who see you and say, "Can't they be doing more things, more physical stuff?" That's it is a great thing that the hospitals and rehabilitation facilities do, is they can address walking and moving and standing and
Mhm,
lifting and and shifting and all that kind of stuff. They can address that, so they're really good at that. But then, and they're not resourced to handle the emotional side of recovery
mhm,
from any condition. You know, it doesn't matter who they are. Um, I know that in stroke, one of the things that gets missed out on a lot is the emotional side.
mhm,
Mental health kind of gets a little bit of a look in. Physical definitely does, but the emotional side gets missed. And you can't
mhm,
heal from any trauma if you don't do, I call the 3-tier kind of recovery, emotional, uh, mental and physical. You've got to do all three. And if you don't do one,
Yeah.
I think emotional seems like it's 1/3 of the pie, like it seems to represent 33%. But I think the power of emotional healing is far greater than 33%. I think it gives
Mhm.
way more back when you do the hard work and go where the trauma is and face your demons and
Yeah.
overcome all that kind of stuff. Now, what I love about a group like yours would be that people come there for something else. They think they're coming for yoga and they think they're coming for movement and all this kind of stuff. And then because of the type of space that you have is it's
Mm.
safe and there's an opportunity for them to share things they may not have normally shared with people who are like-minded, with people who are similar to them, and people who
Mhm.
have been through what they've been through, maybe in a different format, but have a similar trauma.
For
And
sure.
then it's like these are kind of my people. I was listening to somebody talk about community, and they broke the word down from the, they broke it down like from community to the words that actually make up that word, and what came back was common unity.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
Love it. Love it.
Right?
And it's interesting, like community, I have 4 pillars that I sort of teach to, and this is sort of the method that I've crafted over my time doing this. And the number one pillar that has to be part of the puzzle is community. And we always sit in a circle because I'm not the boss, I'm not the teacher, I'm not better than. And so we gather around a living room or a kitchen table, and there is that space to share and to be heard and to be seen. And I've had students in my practice that have been incarcerated and have done bad things, and they come with a lot of identity and labels to those things. And in that moment it's irrelevant because we're sitting around the kitchen table, we might even be having tea or coffee, and they're thinking they're going to do yoga. And by definition, yoga means union. It means to unite 2 things together. And so if I get resistance, like, I'm not doing that, crazy pretzel, get on the floor yoga. And so start asking them some questions, or, I get real close and say, can I see what color eyes you have? And there's an immediate connection because we're looking at each other. And then I'll say, you just had a beautiful yoga practice with me. And then they laugh and go, oh, it's not scary. It's not pretzel stuff. It's community. And so we do a check-in every practice. How's your mind? How's your body? How's your spirit? And the purpose of that is to be brave, to be vulnerable and say, my mind is busy, my body sucks, and my spirit's in the dumps. Well, if somebody else is feeling the same thing, now all of a sudden you have shared empathy, you have shared compassion, you have, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, thank goodness I'm not alone. And so then we have this round robin kind of, how are you? And I try to do a check out after we do the other 3 things that I always do in the practice. And in the beginning, that drove my data for agencies who make decisions to say, like, well, something's happening. They came in very dysregulated and pissed off and upset and in pain, and they're leaving yoga feeling peaceful and joyful and grateful. What is happening? And so for years, I took those data as sheets and would hand them into the administrators who never came to the practice. just so they could see like there's something magical that's going on in this 45 minutes, that the least likely people to do yoga are showing up and they're shining in this practice. So community is actually my number one thing that I teach. And so when I have somebody observe me and their question is, well, can't they do more? Like, you just missed all of this courage and sharing and growth, just so that maybe they could stand on one leg. Who cares? Like, who cares about that? But
Yeah.
it's
I
part
love,
of it, but it's
uh,
not all of it.
no, no, it's probably good to fail in front of other people as well when you can't do that,
Yes.
because there's a bit
Yeah.
of a lesson there as well. It's like nobody in that room, nobody cares. It's interesting what you said
Right.
about who comes to your room. With my podcast, I don't have any requirements for people to come on my podcast. You need to be somebody who either had a stroke or somebody who helps people who have had a stroke. And in your case, for example, you might not specifically help or target helping stroke survivors, but people who have neurological conditions is a pass for me. Everything else that you've done in your life that you're been through or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. I couldn't care less. But what I do just want to know is that you're out willing to share a story that's going to help other people. That's all I'm interested in. And that
Mhm.
makes the bar for attending this particular interview very low. And nobody has to worry about, am I good enough? Am I going to be able to uh,
Mhm.
meet up to the expectations of the person hosting and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, just come and have a chat. We'll talk about stuff, and we may not talk about what you're expecting. There won't be any pre-prepared questions. It's just going to be literally. I don't have an agenda other than to share a story about recovery, so that somebody else might hear it and feel better. I also loved that thing that you said about how the community aspect of it is kind of the biggest part of it. It's your number one.
Mhm.
I have a chapter in the book that's also about finding your right community
Mhm.
and the struggles that people will face. Imagine a guy who's had, been incarcerated and now is coming to yoga. Imagine what his friends and previous community or other communities would, you know, kind of look at him like, if he said, I'm going to yoga. A lot of people would get resistance, and
Mhm.
some of the community that I talked about was what we need to do is find a way to increase the types and variation of the people that we hang out with, but also to scale back on some that we used to hang out with, to find a
Yeah.
way to maybe not cut ties and not be mean and nasty to people who don't serve you anymore, but just sort of spend less time in those spaces and start spending more time in other spaces. And I love what you said about volunteering, because I did volunteering for about, I reckon I did it properly for about 5 or 6 years after my neurological condition first sort of appeared. And doing that and having no expectation to get anything in return
Mhm.
just changed my life for the better. That
So good. Yeah.
volunteering is a strange thing, because you think that it's taking a, the old me thought, you're taking advantage of people. They're volunteering, they're not getting paid, they're not doing it. And it's like, well, no, it didn't matter. It mattered
Yeah.
not that they weren't getting paid.
Yeah.
The only challenge I have with volunteering for the particular organization that I did was that most of the people volunteering can't work at all because they are
Mhm.
stroke survivors. And I felt that maybe they could just reimburse a few more expenses to do that volunteering more
Sure.
and better than what they were doing. But they were limited in their funds. So volunteering does help and was a really useful service. And in the end, the volunteering that we were doing was making a difference in preventing stroke and supporting
Yeah.
people who had loved ones who had a stroke. So it was still worth doing. But that was the beginning of my journey towards purpose, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so selfless. And once word got out of what I do, and then I became a brain injury specialist just to better understand the brain and things that happen inside the brain and how it looks so different. You may have a TBI or acquired brain injury, and so you get that label, but it's also individual and so different. And so when I stopped volunteering in that realm, I found volunteering in hospice to be so fulfilling and kind of replace that time. And my job in hospice is rubbing people's feet as they transition in their death. And it's, people are like, oh, how do you do that? It's so much love, and it's such an honor. And so I feel like volunteering can be very honorable for the volunteer. Like, you learn so much when you're not doing it for financial gain. You are totally in the presence of receiving. You think you're giving, but you're really receiving. And I love it. I think people should volunteer in some ways. If it's sitting with a neighbor or picking up trash on your trail that you walk every day, just do something to better the world. And it's a ripple effect that happens for sure.
I am curious now. Can we touch on that conversation a bit earlier? You said about massaging people's feet as they transition.
Mhm.
So, what's all that about? How did that even become a thing? I love the idea of it, but how did it become a thing?
Such a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that because I'm not a foot person. I really don't like touching people's feet. I'm not a touchy person, but there's something that came into my life. And so my first husband, the father of my three children, who opted that this was too hard, made that choice to carry on with his life, and that was okay. Of course I had anger, but I did my best. I did what I needed to do. I moved forward, let him be. He ended up just not taking really good care of his physical body, probably had some mental illness, and Reader's Digest version, he ended up passing away when he was just 47 years old. And right before he died, my children, my boys at age 22 and 17, were asked to make a decision to take him off life support as just young men. And so I was supportive of them through that process, and we all took turns saying our goodbyes. And so my young children, my young boys, as young adults, had to make that call, and it was gut-wrenching. And he ended up living about 10 days, and the doctors had just anticipated he would only live a couple hours once they extubated him. And so in that 10 days, he was able to be cognizant enough to say, I don't want to live, please sign a DNR. And so he did all of that. But at the end of his life, my oldest son got a phone call, and they said, he's very, very close. Do you want to come and sit with him? And my oldest son called me in tears, and he said, I can't do this again. I can't do it again. I can't say goodbye again. And so the father of my children ended up dying alone. And it just, we had our differences, of course, and it was really hard to be left in the situation I was, but there's healing that comes. And I just felt such a strong internal need that nobody should die alone. And I reached out to hospice and said, I think I need to volunteer. I felt like maybe I just needed to understand death better. And I found out later that nobody in hospice dies alone. There's little angels like me that go in if there's no family members, and they sit with people, hold their hands, rub their feet, do whatever we do. And so that made me feel better. But what was so interesting is my first assignment with somebody dying, they gave me, here's your chart, go down the hall. It's the last door on the left. It was actually the same exact room that my children's father died in. And that just made sense to me. It felt right. And so that's how I ended up doing it. Is it wasn't that I felt like I need to make amends or anything. Like, we had a great relationship at the end, and I felt okay, but I just felt people shouldn't be alone at that time. They just shouldn't be alone. So I wanted to just touch people and rub their feet. I don't know. So I love it. I love it so much.
It's fascinating what you said. So, how many times would you have sat with somebody who passed?
Well, it really varies. Like, I had one beautiful man who I met with him every Saturday for 18 months. And I rubbed his feet every Saturday for a year and a half before he finally passed. And then there's some that you meet once, and that's it. It just depends on how close they are, how ready they are. There's a lot that we don't understand on the outside until you are step into the world of hospice, but people have to be ready. You know, the body might be ready, but there's a lot that happens on that spirit level. And to witness that, what I learned is I want to make sure my ducks are in a row spiritually, because it's not pretty when you're struggling. And and so it's just inspired me to live a beautiful life, and a life that's based on gratitude. And I tell my students, we're going to pull out all the weeds in our heart that just take up too much space, like resentment and bitterness, and just plant some other things in that space. And so I try every day just to check in with my own internal garden. And is there some disappointment that's kind of bubbling up? And I need to get rid of that because it's getting in the way of acceptance or peacefulness. And it's just a practice that I feel so strongly about, to really live our best life every day, because we just don't know. And life's way too short to live with regret and bitterness and a feeling of lack and limitation, because it's just like that. And so I try to teach that, and hospice has really opened up my eyes to living my best life. And I've met amazing people that give you chills down your spine, that there's just something so beautiful that I would have never experienced. So it's all good.
Far out. I guess I was expecting that part of it to come, that part where um, it's, I don't know if the words motivate, it motivates you. Maybe you'll have another word for it, but it motivates you to get on with things and life, and to put things at,
Yeah.
at ease, and to put things to bed, and to move on, and to overcome.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of
Yeah.
stroke survivors might have had fear of failure or something like that before they had a stroke. They might have
Mhm.
had the fear of failure. I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. And then sometimes what happens, stroke creates even more fear, because if they weren't physically capable of doing something before, after stroke, they're probably less physically capable of doing it. Um, and
Yeah.
some people go through that whole life's over routine and all that type of stuff. And it's like,
Mhm.
I don't know if it is, I don't know if it needs to be over. I know of plenty of people who have won gold medals at the Paralympics after their disability occurred, you know,
Mhm.
and before that, they had never participated in sport and were never going to win a gold medal in the Olympics in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form, right? So how how does seeing that part of life, the end of life, how does that change your perspective, your mindset of going forward from the person that you were, say,
Mhm.
10 years into the separation? How do you see yourself as being completely are you completely different to who you were then?
Totally,
You know what I
totally
mean?
different.
I'm fumbling
Just,
around trying to understand like
yeah.
what the difference in you is compared to that person in the past.
I think the person in the past wanted so much control. I wanted to
Ah,
control everything. And here I had this child that I couldn't control. I had no control of what occurred to her or for her. If you look at it, for her and for me, it was the greatest thing ever. And so I wanted to control. And so as a young mom, I color coded all the toy boxes and made everything perfect. And that was my control. And and when I realized that I got to let go of the steering wheel, and I just got to live my life from gratitude. Like, gratitude is one of the other four pillars that I teach. We finish every class with gratitude, because we could list a laundry list of things that are wrong in our life. But if we look at the blue sky, well, right there, we have the ability to see and to discern color. Or we can smell something. And a lot of, people with neurological stuff can't smell anymore, but they might remember the smell of cookies or an orange. And so I really tap into the five senses, because that's present moment. It's right now. So I might have the students look out the window, tell me something you see that's beautiful. I might say, I need you to close your eyes and let's listen. And then there's birds or there's traffic, there's life around us. And so I think for me, it really helped me to see, like, I can't control everything, but I can control my reaction or my response to everything. And every day we go about our life, there's going to be triggers, there's going to be pain points, there's going to be joy. And how do I respond to that or react? And so the word react has action in it. It's usually forceful. I react in anger. I react with a slam door. I throw something. I get mad, or I respond to it by getting curious about it. And then I get grateful about it. And I think that's what really shifted in my life was I don't have control other than I can control my thoughts. I can't control other people. I can't control my body all the time. I suffer with chronic pain, and I just had my 5th hip surgery a few weeks ago. I can't control that, but I can control how I respond to it. And if I'm grateful every day that I can sit in a chair with not too much pain and I can chat about what I'm passionate about, then that's okay. That's what I can control is my mind.
Yeah.
So I try to finish my class with that, because people who have had a stroke or an event, they might feel that they have no control, and they can control how they respond to things, and then we can control our outlook on life by being grateful. And a lot of times people want to get away with, well, I'm grateful for my friends, my family, my house. Nope, those are given. I want you to go deeper than that. I want you to go deeper than just family, friends, and a place to live. So I might do follow-up things. Well, why is your mom important to you? Well, she takes care of me. Well, great. So you feel understood. Well, there it is. And they're able to articulate better than just friends, family, and a place to live. It goes a little bit deeper into their being.
It goes way deeper, and it just needs somebody to prod a little further and ask some more questions, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I know what you said about your hip, how difficult that could be. My mum had hip problems, and she's had a lower back problem probably from when she was a child, like when she was born, and she's in her late 70s now. And she had so much pain that she went from somebody in her 70s that was walking 5 kilometers a day.
Mhm.
It's about 2.5 mile a day. She went to not being able to move pretty much off the couch because of so much pain, and she
Mhm.
thought it was a lower back. And partially, the lower back was sort of starting to get to the point where it needed to be resolved through surgery. And in that process of trying to find the uh, problem with the lower back, they did some scans and they found that she actually had um, a very arthritic hip and she needed a hip replacement.
Yeah.
And she couldn't go through those surgeries at the same time. She had to do one and then go through the other one a year later.
Mhm.
So she did the back surgery first, and that relieved some of the pain. But then it somehow brought forward all of the hip pain, and she was so disabled by it that she was
Mhm.
in so much pain. It was probably the first time in my life that I've seen her depressed. You know what I would call depressed,
Mhm.
and she didn't describe it like that, but that's kind of how it looked. And I said to her, "Why don't you take some pain meds?" And she never took any pain meds for any of her
Wow.
issues ever. She's never taken any pain meds. And doctors gave her a couple. She took them once. It slowed down her bowels. She said, I'm never taking them again. They stopped me from going to the toilet. I said, okay, fair enough. And then I was just trying to get to the bottom of why she can manage when I know people who are suffering from similar issues, back or leg problems or knee problems, etc., and they're on pain meds. And she said because there's so much more worse things that can be happening to me and my family right now. And if the
Mhm.
only thing that I have to deal with is pain, then I'm pretty blessed. That's pretty good, you know. I'll manage that. And in time, the surgery will come, and hopefully, if the surgery works, then the pain will be reduced and everything will go away.
Good.
And it's like, my gosh, like, how do you bottle that? How do you bottle that and then just hand it down to other people to deal with that? I just couldn't understand it. And I think it comes back to what we said about um, suffering earlier, which
Mhm.
is a quote. There's a quote that's been attributed to the Dalai Lama, which goes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is
Mhm.
optional.
Yeah, for
And,
sure.
and
For sure.
suffering, for people who might not have caught on to what I meant by that, is suffering is in the head.
Mhm.
Pain and physical pain and all that kind of thing is in the body, but suffering is something that's happening in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really felt like when I went back to my yoga teacher, and after he had opened up, kind of took the blinders off of my suffering, I was choosing that. I was choosing to see my situation with my daughter and my husband leaving me as just this misery, when in actuality it was empowering and it was good and it was what needed to happen. And I stepped into being an amazing advocate for her, and she's doing tremendously well for a 30-year-old. And I needed to do that, and I probably couldn't have done that if he would have stuck around. And I don't know why things happened, but it did. And I was no longer responding to the life I had as suffering. I was responding to the life I had as an opportunity and a blessing, and everything changed. And so if I can just pass that nugget on to the students that are in front of me, that there is an opportunity in every situation to be grateful, to shine, to do something with it. That sort of thing I always say, well, what are you going to do with it? And so when we talk about like the physical part of yoga, that brings up some frustration for my students who maybe are paralyzed, or, there's a lot of, anger when I might suggest, can you put your arms above your head? And students have said, I can't move my left arm. Well, can I help you with that? Can I touch you? Well, there's connection again, there's community, there's an invitation in to allow somebody to help. And for a lot of, those harder guys in my world, all of a sudden there's a softening. And so I'm lifting their arm for them, and they're feeling something that they haven't felt since their event, because they don't get PT anymore. They don't get, physiotherapy. They don't get that stretch. There's no funding for massage. And then they're like putty in my hands, like, oh, can you do that again? Can you do it again? And I move their arm this way, and they feel something here. Well, what I've done that they're not aware of is I've just taken their left hand and crossed that amazing midline to the right side. And there's a little bit of neurons happening in the brain that they didn't even know was going on. And so I do that a few times, and all of a sudden their anxiety, their dysregulation, their whatever I call it, their pissed offery, kind of just settles down because I've crossed the midline. And then we do that a few times. We might make a cake, make some frosting. I mean, it's all playful things. I'm not going in and speaking Sanskrit. I'm just like, hey, reach across. Let's do some boxing. And I'm working that midline, and there's some organization happening in the brain. And then the physical piece is they're feeling a sensation they haven't felt in a long time, and they feel better. And I support their spine with a pillow if they're slumped, and now all of a sudden they can take a full breath because they're not curled into this, half fetal position, because now they can open up the diaphragm. Well, that brings oxygen to the brain, and then there's clarity. And so, of course, by the end of 45 minutes, they're going to feel different, but they don't even know what they're doing to know that it's going to be different, because I don't make it scary or say, well, you're going to follow me and here's what we're going to do. It's just like, hey, can you touch my hand and touch your toe? No, your other hand. And we make cake and frosting. And um, I just make it something that is familiar to them. So a lot of the gentlemen, we do referee signals, we do touchdowns or whatever. I got my little poster out and I learned all the signals, what referees do. And pretty soon we're doing referee signals, and they have no idea, but it's fun, and they're moving, and they haven't moved for a long time. And then there's laughter, And look how funny this guy is. And look at, you did that. You lifted your leg, and there's camaraderie and connection. And oh, so
Yeah.
good.
I felt
You know,
that
it's
in
so good.
rehab. I felt that in rehab. You know, everyone is about a week or 2 weeks or a month out of having a stroke, the worst thing that happened to them. And all of a sudden, they're more interested in how well you're doing with your hand movement or with
Yeah.
your leg movement. And they're pretty stuffed themselves, you know, but they're going,
Yeah.
hey, well done, man. And you don't know this person from a bar of soap. And then they're just like, wow, it's such an interesting situation to find yourself in is when everyone is supposedly suffering, everyone's in pain, everyone's got something wrong, but everyone's looking out to pick, you know,
Yeah.
to pick you up, you know, to support you, to make you feel better. And it doesn't happen at home on your own. It doesn't happen
No.
being at the house on your own, miserable, suffering, and worrying about what
Yeah.
people think and all that type of stuff. And I love how you suck in the men, you know, they're just so dumb, man. What you got to do is say, do hand signals,
Yeah.
referee signals.
Yeah.
Because that, when you said that immediately, I felt like, you know, that's me taking control of a situation, telling people what to do. You know, no, that's not how it was. No, that's not a touchdown. No, this is,
Yeah.
it, you know, feels like it's an authority kind of thing. You know, I'm telling you what to do and you have to comply. And it's like, man, so simple, but um, the benefits are huge. And that's the thing is I've done another 2 episodes on yoga, adaptive yoga, um, one with, it doesn't matter. They're all about 30 episodes apart, something like that. And that's the whole point. And the whole point is to try and get people to understand it shouldn't even really be called yoga because it's, you know,
Right.
not really
Right.
yet the yoga that
Right.
we all sort of see. But I
Yeah.
love the fact that the word yoga is used because most people know what yoga looks like. And I love how then you sort of um, take the word yoga and just use it as a scam to get people in. And then you just change it and turn it into
Totally.
mixing the bowl
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. It's got nothing to do with what, you know, um, tights and weird
Yeah.
stretchy poses
Yeah.
and
And
downward
what's
facing
cool
dog.
is they like see like I can do something.
Mm,
So then there's confidence that comes, and they can see, you know, that their brokenness. A lot of times we have very discouraged and broken. And then you hear from your peers, no, you're not broken. You're amazing. And I feel something physiologically different in my body when I'm just getting those endorphins and I'm moving and my neurons are communicating and I'm taking a full breath. And we do the third pillar of my practice is breathing. And we're going to breathe together because when I breathe out, you're going to breathe in. And that means we're connected.
mm,
Again, we've just shared breath. And so it always trickles back down to the union. You and me right now, we're practicing yoga because we're connected, two
mm,
pieces coming together. And even if you come to the yoga practice and you simply sit and you breathe and you answer a question, that's okay. If they're not in a place to move their body, that's okay. There's no like, you have to do this. It's just come as you are and you will be welcomed and seen. And so we do those four things and we finish with a little checkout. There's always opportunity to share, you know, how do you feel? What's going on, or what's going on next week? What's next in your day? And, you know, they're very curious about my life and I'm very transparent with what's going on in my world. And, you know, I've been out of work for 4 months because I had my hip replacement. And then week 5, I'm doing great. All of a sudden, my leg swells up twice as big. Can't walk on it. I have to go back and get the whole thing redone. I have blood clots. I have an infection. And so I promise them, yeah, I'll be back. I'll be back in 6 weeks because everybody says it's so easy. It's been 4 months. And so I'm just now going back next week for my first kind of go back. And for these guys, a lot of the students, there's trust, you know, people say, oh, I'm going to show up and do this with you, and then they don't show up. And so my heart has been just like, they need to know I am coming back because I promised them I would be back.
mm,
And I've built a lot of trust in them. And so word's out, they know I'm coming, and it'll be great to see them again and just see how they've maintained their mindfulness, their gratitude. I left them with a little bit of homework. I need to know what you're grateful for. And so we do little contests like gratitude challenges. And in December, we do karma yoga, which is where I ask them to come up with a project to be of service to other people. And I'll provide all the stuff, but you got to figure out what you want to do. And so a popular project is to bring muffins to the neighbor, and they don't even know their neighbor, which is a tragedy because you should know your neighbor. And so that's an opportunity for them to, I bring the muffins, they package them up, and they go and knock on the door in a wheelchair, however we get there. And they say, my name is so-and-so, and I'd like to give you this for holidays. Now all of a sudden they're providing something to their neighbor, and we've just given away something good. And I've had 2 houses do this, where the neighbor then invites the residents to come over and watch football. Like, there's connection now, there's a purpose. And so it always kind of goes back to, what are we here to do? And it's not to gain flexibility or touch our toes or to look good in yoga pants, but it's to find I have purpose and value. And maybe I can move my arm a little bit with help, or I bring a yoga strap and I tie it around this guy's paralyzed arm and I say, pull. And all of a sudden he can pull his own arm. Well, he didn't know he could do that. And so now he has a skill that he didn't know he had. And so you can just see confidence growing, and they come in eager every single week. It's cool. It's really cool.
And yeah, it is cool. And even if you just teach them how to breathe, that is
Yes.
just the biggest gift.
Yeah.
Before we started the interview, I told you a little bit about my week and how I have taken a fall a few days ago. Today's Saturday when we're recording this for me, and it was on Wednesday at around 3 p.m. So what I do for a living is painting and maintenance, and we've got a business that paints people's houses. And I was climbing up the ladder of this scaffold, and my left arm is my arm with the deficits. It's the one that is numb and doesn't feel things quite so well. And in the last 10 years, I've been up and down ladders and scaffolds a lot. It's always a little bit sort of scary. My balance is the issue normally. And I've taken a climb up this ladder. I only got 2 rungs up. And when I was about to get onto the 3rd rung with my left leg, and I went to grab the rung above my head with my hand grabbed that rung, but it let go. And sometimes my hand does that. It lets go of things. And this time it let go at the worst time. And I took a tumble. I fell backwards. And before I hit the deck, I landed on a metal bar that was positioned horizontally, which was part of the scaffold, and I smashed my ribs, the back of my ribs on the right-hand side. And then I fell off the metal bar and then landed with my head onto the deck. So I took 2 hits, one onto the metal bar and one onto the deck. So everyone who's watching and listening, I am okay, but I am in a lot of pain. It has been very difficult to sleep the last 3 or 4 days. And it's not going to get any easier for the next few days. But one of the things that I noticed the most is the inability, because of the pain of my ribs, and they're not broken. I had a look; they're not cracked. There's no fractures or anything like that. A lot of bruising. Is laughing, sneezing, coughing, clearing my throat. That's all difficult, and taking big breaths is difficult.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's impacted how my chest is feeling literally in 3 days, because
Wow.
I haven't been able to breathe properly, and I'm avoiding taking, large breaths with my rib cage, and I'm trying to
Yeah.
minimize the amount of the rib cage expands. And I just feel like from that, the lack of oxygenation, like I feel more lethargic, I feel more tired. And it's probably also got to do with the injury and the fact that I'm not sleeping, but everything has become harder. And what a gift, giving somebody the gift of just being able to breathe more.
Yeah.
At yoga, what that does for energy levels, their ability to feel like they can do something that's strenuous better, their brain is better, their organs work better, their digestion works better, everything works
Mhm.
better just by that. And
Yeah.
what I'm trying to demonstrate, people watching and listening, is just get onto YouTube, find a YouTube video that teaches you how to breathe, how to do deep breathing. And it hasn't cost you a single thing. You didn't have to go anywhere. And you can only, and all you need to do is do it for 5 minutes a day. And even if you only do it
Yeah.
for 5 minutes every second day, and you still get this amazing benefit. And then you take that benefit and then you do something with it, you pass it on, you let other people know what you did. If you take that to yoga or adaptive yoga or whatever you want to call it, it'll just be an amazing thing that you learned that you didn't think was that important. Like, I'm breathing all the time, but not really.
Yeah.
Some of us aren't
Yeah.
really breathing all the time.
And they say that like the average yogi breathes anywhere from 20 to 24 breaths per minute. So we're taking longer breaths, right? And somebody who doesn't practice yoga is taking fast, quick, like very fast, very quick, swift breaths because we're in fight or flight, we're panicking, so we're
Anxious.
panting. And so if I can teach them to rise that elevator up and go really slow and to find a space between the inhale and a space between the exhale, where there's just this micro pause, well, then we go back to Viktor Frankl, who's the greatest teacher ever, and says, between every stimulus and every response, there's a space. In that space, we get to choose, and in that choice lies freedom. So we get a trigger. If we have a micro space, we get to choose. Am I going to react or am I going to respond? So if I can teach how to breathe in that way, like take a breath and hold it for a second, you just created a space. And the more that we can create space in our breath, that creates space in our body, then we can create space in our mind. We can access coping strategies. We can stop before we yell at somebody. Now I have space in all parts of my being. And when there's space, there's clarity and peace.
And you're
So,
responding instead of reacting.
yes. And most of us live a stressful life, so we're constantly reacting. Then you throw in a neurological condition where you don't feel like you have control, you don't know who you are, you're in pain, you're in, fear. What's going to be my future? I'm 20 years old and I got hit by a car, and I'm here all the time, stress, fight or flight. And so even if for 45 minutes we're decompressing that and creating space. And so I might, guide the breath. We're going to breathe in for 4, which is hard for brand new people. We're going to hold it for 2. Now breathe out for 4. Be without for 2. Takes a while to get there, but they're seeing that their physical body can do it. And then they're seeing like, oh, I feel like this, like a lot of them say like, wow, I feel like I got a buzz. I feel kind of good. Well,
Mm.
yeah. And then what's happening to the chemicals in your brain? You're like, oh, I can handle today because I feel good. So it's all just, another tool in their toolbox. And that's why I try to tell them, I'm not going to teach you how to stand on your head or stand on your leg and look good in yoga pants. I'm going to teach you how to be the best version of who you are today. And then hopefully you'll carry that into the next day.
Yeah. And that has a ripple effect that affects everybody in a positive way around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So hopefully soon you'll be back at it. How far off do you feel like you are now?
Well, I actually did a couple houses yesterday. One house was a female, all women with traumatic brain injuries. So it was good. It was hard for different reasons. All of the women are my age, and that's always a real eye opener to sit with other moms and my grandma and just, here I get the freedom to drive and to go about my life. And they're living in a home where most of them are in wheelchairs and they rarely get visitors. It's just hard, but it was good to be back. And then I had a all female house of older women with dementia. And I mean, I say this with the most respect ever, but they didn't even know I was ever gone. So that's okay. Like, they're like, oh, you're here. It was so sweet. Like, they didn't know it's been 4 months, but that's okay. They were happy to see me and I'll take it. So it was good. And then next week I start my full schedule back and I'm ready. Like, I've gained so much perspective in my own suffering with this hip stuff. You know, I went in feeling the strongest physically that I've ever been in my adult life. I was physically ready, emotionally ready. And then I get a lot of complications. I'm in and out of the hospital a lot. And I had to get humble and I had to, again, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to learn? What's my perspective? And I was a girl that would track my steps and I had to be at, 20,000 steps a day or I was not good and I was lifting weights all the time. And I don't even care now. I don't even care. And so that has been a huge lesson in me is how do I feel? If I feel like walking, I'll take a walk. I still use a cane, that's okay. But I think I've softened myself. I have very high standards for myself, and I've lowered them to where I am just happier. I'm not so rigid and I have to, I have to, I have to, I have to. And so I want to pass that on to my students to look at their own life and what perspective have they gained in their own, suffering, their own pain, their own discouragement. I've been very discouraged in my body's ability to heal. And what do we do with it? How can we be better? So I'm excited to share some of that and learn from them. I mean, they're the greatest teachers. Their life's been upside down. I just had a bad hip, but I would like to be able to receive some wisdom from them because I do feel, although I'm called the yoga teacher, I feel like I gain so much from them that I take their lessons and the gift that my intention is always is as I receive a lesson from them, their wisdom, their courage. My job, I believe, is to be a conduit for them. And so, with their permission, I often write about their story. I share their insights to their injury on a blog or in a podcast or however I get a platform to do that because they're sitting in a house all day by themselves with no ability to share their story. And if I'm so blessed to hear their story, then I kind of have a divine responsibility to share that because I think we can all learn from them. And I really honor that. And I take it with a privilege to be able to share their story and make a difference in people's lives who have no idea that even these things exist in the world. You hear about stroke, but unless you're touched by it, what does that look like?
Yeah.
So,
Same with any other condition that people go through, right? You hear about what a hip surgery is like. So, yeah, whatever. Okay. They put a new one in, you're good to go.
yeah.
That's not what it means. I see my growth came from helping other people with the podcast as well and providing that platform so people can share stories. I didn't realize how powerful it was going to be, but it was so powerful and I got so much out of it. And then I had another opportunity to grow and have some wisdom come my way when I was in a wheelchair for a little while when I couldn't walk. And then I realized for the first time, oh, people who are sitting in a wheelchair who can't walk aren't just sitting down. There's way more to it than just sitting on their butt and
Yeah.
getting through life with wheels instead of legs. And it's like, okay, you were unwise to the world. You were naive. And um, that's okay. And it was okay that I was because you don't know what people are going through unless you're going through it. It's very
Yeah.
hard to put yourself in other people's shoes, right? And life and to see what it's really like. But, wisdom came from that. And every time I have a fall, uh, I try not to make it a very bad one or a deadly one or whatever. I try to avoid them. But I learned something. I learned that I am still not my old self, the one that
Mhm.
was able to feel everything on the left side and all that kind of thing. And then I need to, it's a reminder, take care, be patient,
Yeah.
slow down at the end of the day. It was 3 p.m. It was the end of the day. We'd been going all day. And maybe I was tired. Maybe, who knows? So I love the things you shared today. Thank you so much for reaching out to be on the podcast. If people wanted to connect with you, perhaps find out about where one of your classes might be or invite you to their location, where's the best place for them to go to connect with you?
Probably, email is always great. So my email, I'm always on the email and very responsive to that. Also my Instagram. Instagram has a little bit of my personal life too. It's not just all business. I have a YouTube channel where I have a series of chair yoga classes that you can do at home. I have a dementia series. I have an entire series on hip replacements because I think if we can teach what we know and what we're going through, it can empower other people. And my slant on hip replacement has been to heal mindfully. And while the doctors give you great advice on the physical side, your self-care changes, your habits change, your emotions change. And so I tried to provide through the yoga lens, like how to have some mindfulness in the healing process. So that has been so much fun to share that. So YouTube is a great platform. I have a
Okay.
lot of content that's free. And it might hit somebody's heart. There's a whole gratitude series, 10 days of being grateful. And so that's a great place. Instagram or YouTube or an email is perfect.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure that the links to all of your socials and all your contact details are in the show notes. For anyone watching and listening, if you want to connect with Stacy, go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episode. That's where you'll find a transcript of the entire interview, plus you'll find the links to Stacy's socials. Stacy Wyatt, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's something I love talking about. So I appreciate all the great questions too. Nobody's asked those things. That's cool.
I'm glad I asked good questions.
You
All the
do.
best with the rest of your recovery, and have a great
Thank you.
start to next week and your new your
Oh,
next chapter in your yoga journey.
perfect. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you for being with us on today's episode. For further insights into our guests and access to a transcript of this interview, visit recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. And to those who have already shared their feedback, your reviews are deeply appreciated. Your words not only sustain this podcast, but also illuminate the path for others seeking solace and guidance in their stroke recovery journey. If you're yet to leave a review, consider sharing your thoughts on iTunes or Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment below, like this episode, and subscribe for future updates. Now, if you're a stroke survivor eager to share your story, know that you are welcome here, unscripted and unfiltered. Your experience holds the power to inspire and uplift others facing similar challenges. And for those with innovative products or services geared towards supporting stroke survivors, there's an opportunity to collaborate on a sponsored episode of the show as well. Simply visit recoveryafterstroke.com/contact to explore this avenue further. Thank you once again for your presence and your support. Together, we navigate the journey of recovery one episode at a time. Until the next time, take care and stay resilient.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation consultation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.